In the current theme park landscape today, Disney and Universal are obviously battling things out with immersive lands for their parks, as in mostly self-contained areas usually tied to a single intellectual property or theme. If I asked you which land came first though, what would you say? I think that most people would think of Hogsmeade because that's what really kicked things off, later resulting in Diagon Alley, and Disney trying to compete with Pandora, Toy Story Land, and Galaxy's Edge. They've certainly continued building past this, whether it be Avengers Campus, most of Epic Universe, or the newly announced Monsters Inc. Miniland and a Villains Land for Walt Disney World. However, when we think of these hyper-immersive worlds, it didn't actually even start with Universal, but rather with Disney in 1998. Weirdly, the first fully immersive theme park lands were Africa, Asia, and Dinoland USA at Animal Kingdom, and I think they're not given credit for how they changed theme park design because they don't have a shiny IP attached that sells ridiculous quantities of merch. Or at least, nothing on the scale of Harry Potter or Star Wars. Still, people don't really think to include Universal creations like Pre-Velocicoaster Jurassic Park, or even Marvel's Superhero Island in the conversation about immersive lands, even though they do mostly fit the definition. However, one that never really gets any love is Seuss Landing, which to me is absolutely one of the coolest lands ever built, as it's a well-designed love letter to the stories and art style of Dr. Seuss books, all wrapped up in a land that brings those stories together. At least, I think I would consider it an immersive land, as despite not trying to justify its ride systems as part of its world, its story is that it's a Seuss-themed island, and all the buildings and attractions do fit together into a cohesive experience. I guess I'm not entirely sure about that one, so let me know if you think this qualifies as being technically immersive or not. But either way, I am disappointed that this is never mentioned among great theme park lands. Unfortunately, too many people just view this as an obligatory land for kids, which I kind of understand coming from most general park goers, but even among dedicated park fans, I think this land is often overlooked or dismissed as well. While you definitely have your people who will always chime in to praise the Cat in the Hat or the Sky Seuss Trolley, I never see anyone actually talking about how interesting and detailed this land is, which is really disappointing because there's so much thought and care put into this that people are really missing. I don't think that it deserves that kind of apathetic forgettability. So today, I wanted to speak specifically about why I feel that the land is actually underrated, because really, it has a lot more depth than most people might realize, and I think that it deserves to be highlighted as one of the best theme park lands ever created. Just a quick favor, but videos like these take a lot of time and money to produce, so if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by just leaving a like. One of the strengths of Islands of Adventure is how each land was designed to contrast with one another, and as you walk out to the lagoon, Seuss Landing stands out for just how perfectly it emulates the art style of the books. From the strange, whimsical arches of Sneech Beach to the cascading waterfalls near the entrance closest to Port of Entry, the land captures the surrealist nature of the book art, while also incorporating a literary theme that manifests quite literally. For example, the land features Dr. Seuss's All the Books You Can Read, a shop dedicated to just selling you books under the Dr. Seuss brand, although you can also find them throughout some of the other shops as well. For example, the Cat in the Hat books are found in Cat's Hats and Things, the exit gift shop of the ride. On a related note, the entertainment in the land is also related to the literature, with the land usually performing Oh, the Stories You'll Hear, which brings out costumed characters who enact out popular Seuss stories as told by a narrator, which is a fun bit of streetmosphere. During November and December, when the land dresses up for Christmas, the Who's of Whoville will perform carols, and the land offers Grinchmas, a live retelling of How the Grinch Stole Christmas, which is hosted in one of the sound stages. In terms of food, Universal parks are not known for their quality. In fact, some places serve some of the worst food you'll ever experience, but over the past few years, Universal has really been making an effort to fix this. One way they've done that is through serving mediocre but acceptable quality cafeteria food, but dressing it up in a clever way that adds a fun novelty to it. For example, many of the themed items in Super Nintendo World in Hollywood or the Minion Cafe in Florida really elevate their food options through thematic presentation, and recently, the Circus McGurkus Cafe was refurbished and added new items to its menu as well. Previously, this location served mostly low-quality pizza, which was overpriced by even theme park standards, but after reopening, the former kitchen was covered up and the menu reworked to have items that fit with the theme of the land. I tried a few recently, and they're now what I would consider decent quality, but again, are elevated through their creative presentation. It's a nice reworking of the restaurant because not only is the food now fun, but the location has always been great, offering a lot of visual kineticism while you eat. I should also mention that the Sky Seuss trolley runs above diners, which is a fun and underrated interaction that I never see people really talk about. While there are shops and stands that sell candy, fudge, and other sweet treats throughout the land, it's also worth noting that Green Eggs and Ham, which has a cool building design by the way, reworked its menu in 2019 and now sells a variety of loaded tots, which is one of the better places to go for a snack in the parks. Even if you don't do any shopping or dining though, just walking around the land and observing its theming is rewarding, as a lot of thought and time was clearly put into creating something so visually interesting. From the strange, surrealist decorative features, to the hand-drawn style of the building paint, to the wacky, unconventional choices of plants and trees, you'll never find any straight lines anywhere, and the land is accompanied by a lot of visual kineticism from the rides and signs, all tied together through a soundtrack designed to emulate what you would hear from early cartoons. There's no land like this anywhere because there's also nothing like the artistic style of Dr. Seuss, and I think it's notable through just how unique it happens to be visually. One thing that people often fail to do in the Universal parks is explore and look for details, and in the case of Seuss Landing, I think this is very rewarding because there's a lot you'll miss. For example, between the entrance and the Cat in the Hat, you'll find McElligot's Pool, which at first just appears to be a decorative literary reference, but someone once showed me that if you throw a coin into the mouth of a fish, it'll scorch you in the face with a hidden water jet. That's a pretty cool detail that most people will never experience, but if you take the time to explore, you'll find a lot of references from the various books. For example, if you walk behind Cat's Hats and Things, there's a small secluded courtyard where you'll find an egg from Horton Hatches the Egg, or if you're walking through the midway near the Seuss trolley, which is known as Mulberry Street, you'll clearly see Sergeant Mulvaney from "And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street." Looking just above, you will also see stylized politicians from the same story, with the one on the left depicting Theodore Seuss Geisel himself. If you're down by Sneech Beach, which also has fun elements to observe, you'll also encounter the Zack's Bypass, where both creatures have reached a stalemate, as one only travels north and the other only south. Reportedly, this spot was chosen and the land was built around it, representing the story of the Zaxes as the world evolves around them. Another notable land feature is the Street of the Lifted Lorax, which is a small trail where the story of the Lorax is conveyed through visual elements and these strange receivers which tell part of the story if you put your ear up to them. What's great about Seuss Landing is that there are many references to Seuss's many stories pretty much everywhere, whether out in the land or in the shops, and again, people miss a lot of this detail because they're either run through this land trying to get elsewhere, or they otherwise hit the rides, but fail to explore and see what it has to offer. That's a bit disappointing, as the land was designed with a lot of love and care for the material, so the next time you're here, if you take the time to explore, you'll probably get a lot out of trying to spot the details. In terms of attractions, one of the most underrated in any theme park anywhere is If I Ran the Zoo, which I think even many dedicated park fans are not aware of. That's not to say that this walkthrough attraction for real young kids is something that adults should necessarily seek out, but as someone who's interested in parks and how they run, I'm also interested in them having appropriate balance. As in, I think that family parks need a good selection of rides that are accessible to all members of the family, from the youngest toddler to the oldest grandparent. While not all rides need to cater to every family member, I do think that balance is important, and if you're instead going for more specific demographics, then you end up with either thrill parks like Six Flags or children's parks like Peppa Pig Theme Park. They certainly have their place, but a good balanced attraction lineup obviously has the broadest appeal. In terms of Universal, Islands has certainly become their thrill park, whether through its more intense coasters, its malicious water rides, or the intensity of its indoor dark rides. In the past, I've spoken about how I think Islands needs more accessible family attractions and sit-down shows, but if there's one area where it really shines, it's with building some of the best themed kids areas pretty much anywhere. Mishep the Olive is a well-themed play area down by the water in Toon Lagoon, which I never really knew about until a few years ago, and I think everyone can have fun exploring Camp Jurassic, which is large enough even for adults to run around and have fun in. However, If I Ran the Zoo is definitely meant for children under 5, but as a park fan, I can appreciate that it's a well-themed attraction that has its place. However, that's not to say that you can't get something out of it if you're not a child, because like the rest of Seuss Landing, it's full of references and kinetic movement that make for an interesting experience if you're the kind of person who appreciates theming. Walking in, you'll make your way through a stylized hedge maze, which isn't too confusing, but is full of interactive activities and effects. Making a right, you'll encounter the Sort of a Hen, but this effect has not worked since at least 2021, so I'm not really sure what it's actually supposed to do other than raise over the hedge. Heading through a small clearing and backtracking along the main path, you can head up some steps looking to a lookout with slides and a tower that overlooks the zoo and Seuss Landing more broadly. It's not the most exciting area, but it does allow for some decent views of the immediate land. Heading back to the main path and to where the foot of the slides are, there's a wall of shadow boxes where you can spot various zoo animals, and turning to your right, you encounter the Mazurka, which you can flush out of hiding by spinning the wheel of a fire hydrant, causing the bird to spray you with water. Nearby, there's an unnamed creature who will pop his head out if you tickle his toes, but again, I haven't seen this effect working in years. Returning to the main path, you can crawl through the cave of Khartoum, where you'll look for the elusive Natch. This small tunnel is really nothing more than a few light up eyes and whispers from the speakers, but I can see why children would find this fun. Turning past the cave on your right, you can hop up on the Stumpalowump, where, pumping your feet, the big bug rises out of the bushes with his propeller spinning to send him up. Turning left and exiting the hedge maze, you'll now enter an interactive water play area where you'll spot the bad animal catching machine, and stepping out into the little island, you'll dodge water jets and come up on this interactive water jet sprayer that plays music as you hit the notes on the wall. Just outside of the perimeter of the water, you'll also see this water fountain, which used to also squirt people from flowers behind it if you press the button, although this does not currently seem to work either. Right next to the fountain is what is described as the Long Neck Lady, who, annoyed with people ringing her doorbell, has set the mechanism so that it only triggers by hitting that one followed by this one. This causes the animated figure to scold you, although she used to make an angry whistling noise, which no longer appears to function. Finally, heading into McGrew Zoo, ran by Gerald McGrew, who's on the entrance sign, you'll encounter a number of interesting figures, which includes this long, caterpillar-like cow on springs, a drowsy, elephant-like creature that kids can climb on, and a sick and quarantined Scragglefoot Mulligatawny, who, stepping on his cover, will sneeze on you with a water effect. This area also includes Tic-Tac-Joe, who will let you play tic-tac-toe using lights on his belly if the effect happens to work, and finally, by squirting water out a bathtub, a creature usually rises out and whirls its scrubbers around, although this again does not seem to work. While I'm definitely not the correct demographic for If I Ran the Zoo, and I'm assuming you are if you're watching too, I do think it's a fun, fantastically themed area, especially if most of the effects are working. It's unfortunate that they're not, but I'll cover the maintenance of this land a bit later. For now though, I'm interested in moving on to the other rides. While the land and its details are its most overlooked aspect, I do at least think that the rides get some love from park fans, but I still wanted to talk about them and highlight what I find notable. First, One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish is an aerial carousel, and on first impression, yeah, it's a kid's ride. Most people are not going to experience this because it's not iconic like Dumbo, and I think because that's the case, people miss that it actually offers a unique twist. As the ride starts and you raise into the air, the motion of the ride is accompanied by a song that essentially warns you that you'll get soaked if you don't follow the instructions. Throughout the ride cycle, it'll instruct you to go up or down, and if you don't listen, then you'll be hit with water from spitting fish. Again, not as iconic as Dumbo, but I would say that it's a fun subversion of expectations for this type of ride, especially since it's funny watching people get punished for ignoring the song's instructions. Right across the pathway is the Carousel, which doesn't have any novelty that makes it stand out, but I think is worth appreciating just through the sculpting of its animals, capturing the surrealist visual illustrations of the Seuss stories really well. You can also see it running from If I Ran the Zoo, so it adds a bit visually to that attraction as well. Where the land stands strongest, however, is with the Cat in the Hat, which in my opinion is one of the coolest and most elaborate pretzel-style dark rides ever created. Walking into the queue, you'll be blasted with the coldest air conditioning you'll find anywhere in the state of Florida, and in contrast to the chaos outside, the queue is calm, dark, and playing quiet, whimsical music that works as a sudden sensory interruption. The queue incorporates the storybook motif to set up the ride, where you'll read through the opening pages of the story and spot the unnamed narrator and his sister Sally looking out the window in boredom as their mom is away. Entering into the house, which is the load station, you'll board a couch and run through the story of the Cat in the Hat, where the brother and Sally are visited by the troublesome trickster who unleashes chaos on the house, along with his minions Thing 1 and Thing 2. The ride follows the storybook motif pretty well, incorporating words and phrases into the often elaborate sets, and retelling the story of the book faithfully, incorporating spinning into the vehicle to add a bit of thrill. It's just a well-designed dark ride that gets overlooked for the bigger, more intense attractions, but you can really see how a lot of love was put into literally bringing you through the pages of the book. The ride is also notable for not having aged well, with many of its effects and sets showing significant wear and tear since the ride premiered in 1999. Because this is the case, people have described the ride as a nightmare experience, and while I'm usually on board with weirder, often barely functioning dark rides, I don't want to dismiss how great this ride is under its decades of wearing down. Finishing out Seuss Landing is the High in the Sky Seuss Trolley Train ride, which doesn't have the most interesting queue, but does tell the story of the Sneetches, again leaning into that storybook aspect. As you circle upwards on the path towards the station, you'll also see part of the Star-On machine, which adds the stars to the star-bellied Sneetches. Getting to the ride, you're seated in an open car as you travel through the land, which provides scenic views of both itself and the rest of the park. Depending on which side you board, you'll move through different scenes, but starting on the left side, you exit the station and travel through Circus McGurkus, which again is a very cool novelty of having a ride run through a restaurant. I do think this goes underappreciated because the food is not as desirable as the Blue Bayou or the San Angel Inn, so it lacks that same kind of popularity, but it's still a notable element of the ride. Exiting the Big Top, you travel outside briefly before entering another part of the Star-On machine, where you can see the paint being mixed and machinery ready to stamp the Sneetches. Exiting the machine, you travel alongside the exterior of the Hop on Pop ice cream shop, and then travel out over Sneetch Beach, where you might observe Sneetches drifting lazily in the water. Taking a turn back to the station, you travel over a rooftop scene where you encounter old Sylvester McBean and his money-sucking truck, where, through visiting the Sneetches, he uses the Star-On machine to make them equal. In the last scene before the station, you can see this result with two Sneetches getting along and roasting hot dogs over a beach fire. If you ride the Sky Seuss trolley on the right side of the station, the experience is a bit different, first bringing you through the Star Wash, which removes the stars from the Sneetches. Continuing outside, the trolley meanders around the land as the narrator calls out the different elements and attractions. It loops around the top of the Carousel, then traveling over the zoo and to Sneetch Beach, with this track having the better view of the park across the lagoon. The track then loops back and shares the rooftop and Sneetch scenes, although the dialogue is different, as you can see Mrs. McCabe's mailbox, and the narrator tells a brief story of her 23 sons, all named Dave. If you're comparing sides, I do think that the left track is better as it spends more time indoors. It more directly relates to the Sneetch theme of the ride, but I enjoy both for what is unique about them. In general, while I wish that the ride had more indoor scenes, it's still a relaxing trip above the land that offers great views, and I've seen reports that the two sides even have a setting where the train travels both tracks by passing through one of the stations, although this only occurs during after-hours events. Still, while it's not the most exciting attraction that Islands offers, the Sky Trolley is one of my favorites, existing as a calm, relaxing scenic ride similar to Magic Kingdom's People Mover. in conjunction with its details and well-designed rides, Seuss Landing is often overlooked far more than it deserves, and I'm disappointed that people can't appreciate it for what it is, instead writing it off as something forgettable for children. Unfortunately, the land also suffers like many of the older areas of islands, and isn't maintained to the same standard as the Wizarding World. While the Jurassic Park River Adventure has barely moving dinos, and Toon Lagoon has many effects not working in its rides, Seuss Landing has many non-working effects in If I Ran the Zoo, The Cat in the Hat, and some very stiff figures in the Sky Seuss Trolley. Weirdly, I noticed from my footage that a large part of the entry arch is missing, which connected in 2021, but now has a large chunk completely absent, I assume out for refurbishment somewhere. Still, it's disappointing that much of Islands is not maintained like it should be, but to its credit, Seuss Landing has gotten noticeable refurbishments in a way that I haven't seen with the other lands. There's definitely a lot of new paint, and while many effects are not working in the zoo, its state is a lot better than the last time I went through and filmed it in 2021, so there's obviously been an effort to fix things. The Cat in the Hat has many effects that haven't worked since before 2020, but again, its general state is much better than even just a few years ago, and the Seuss Trolley does appear to have almost all of its effects still working, even if they are quite stiff. The loaded tots at Green Eggs and Ham are generally a positive menu change, and the same goes for Circus McGurkus, which is a huge, fun improvement over the cardboard pizza that used to be served there. Seuss Landing is not in the best shape, but it's nice to see that it's still getting some love, and in my opinion, this land could be a lot more popular if a new e-ticket was added. Back behind the Cat in the Hat is a stage where Oh, the Stories You'll Hear used to perform, and while this area is still accessible, it's pretty much abandoned. This area is reportedly an expansion plot, which was originally intended to host a Grinch-themed Mount Crumpet roller coaster, but while this was just a rumor, I do think that it would be the perfect addition. It would be a large draw for a younger audience, which Universal appears to be pivoting to with VillainCon and DreamWorks Land recently, but it would also give Universal a reason to really refurbish the rest of the land and its rides. The rumor may not even be true at all, as I recently learned that in its earliest years, or at least specifically for Christmas season in 2002, this area did have the Mount Crumpet Snow Plummet, a 60-foot ice slide that park guests would go down in a tube, which might be the origin of the rumor. Either way, I would really like for this land to see something new to bring people back, because, in my opinion, it truly is one of the coolest theme park lands built anywhere. There's so much that people just pass right by, and I hope that through this video, I've given you a stronger appreciation for this land. I don't think that Universal gets credit for how incredible Islands was when it opened, partially because they fumbled the marketing campaign, and so people didn't know that they had a new park, and partially because Universal had a much smaller presence when compared to Disney during that period anyways. A lot of this park goes underappreciated, even though it's really well designed, which is disappointing because despite great new additions like Hagrid's or the Velocicoaster, so many people are just running for the rides and not walking around and enjoying the lands. Seuss Landing obviously gets lost among this too, but hopefully I've changed some minds through this video, and if you would like to spread its message about how underrated this land is, leaving a like would do a lot to help boost it further. As always, if you have not yet subscribed and hit the bell notification yet either, you can do so now to be alerted to new videos as they release.